The state we find the lands between in is one ravaged by war and fractures. And if you've watched any of my Elden Ring videos, you'll have heard me point this out, especially the fractures. As I was sitting there, bathing in yellow flame, the fractures that prevent us from reverting back to the one great got me thinking, just how fractured are the lands between? How many orders, factions, groups, and accords are there littered throughout the lands? In my research, I found that there's so many of these, and looking into them really gives you a better understanding and context of everything going on around us. It's pretty fun and interesting to look at, and you know how these games work, right? The only way to figure out what's happened in the game's world is by reading into the finer details or by watching someone explain it in lots of detail in a YouTube video. So that's what we'll be looking at, and I hope you enjoy the video. Let's start off with the big players, you know, the larger alliances, orders, factions, groups, accords, whatever you want to call them. The Golden Order. You know them, and they're seen as the biggest faction in the lands between. They have their own set of beliefs and the power of the Elden Ring and the Erd Tree. The Order was created alongside Queen Marika the Eternal when she plucked the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. As we know, Destined Death is another word for the Rune of Death, and in doing so, her and her demigods became immortal because they had their fated deaths removed. Well, that's one way to maintain power, and Marika's clearly a big player in this order, with Corrin stating that it's founded on the principle that Marika is the one true god. The Order has a god present in the lands with a powerful ring that makes its vessel that god, and a giant overbearing tree that can be seen all throughout the lands. And with all of that comes incantations related to the powers of the tree, the two fingers, and the Golden Order. Not only that, the Order has the ability to absorb practices that contradicted itself in the past according to Rogier. He says this in reference to the Academy of Raya Lucaria and how they obeyed laws which contravened the Golden Order, or so he's told. Speaking of magic, or more specifically, intelligence, we have Golden Order fundamentalism, which are incantations that utilize intelligence and some faith to understand the fundamentals of the Order. Fundamentalism is based on two concepts: the law of regression, the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge, and the law of causality, the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation. It's also safe to say that the hunters of those who live in death, who are a part of the Golden Order, are also fundamentalists, since the fundamentalism incantation, Order Healing, alleviates blight buildup. And in case you didn't know, the status buildup is associated with those who live in death. The Golden Order isn't opposed to immortality since it was founded when Marika removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, but it's opposed to immortality through living in death. Ironic, since Marika's precious Godwyn is confined to this fate. We can follow the happenings of those who live in death by going through Fear's questline and meet fundamentalists like the D twins who share a single soul, Darian, Hunter of the Dead, and Devon, Beholder of Death. Those are some edgy titles. And on the other hand, going down Goldmask's questline will have you go down a more faith-focused path interacting with Brother Corrin and the Goldmask. Miquella, of all people, also created a fundamentalist incantation, Radagon's Rings of Light, to give to his father, Radagon, as a gift of gratitude. That's all lovely, but Miquella abandoned fundamentalism for it could do nothing to treat his sister, Miscellaneous' accursed rot. And this was the beginning of Unalloyed Gold 2, which we've seen be used in the form of a needle to store Millicent's rot. But of course, we can't talk about the Golden Order and its associates without talking about some of those the Order wronged. You have the Crucible and its teachings, scattered, and the Omen, who were buried underground, the Misbegotten, who were punished for making contact with the Crucible and are treated as slaves or worse from birth. And, well, we have the merchants that were once part of the Great Caravan. They were forced underground for being accused of heretical beliefs, to which they then chanted a curse of despair and summoned the Flame of Frenzy. Merchant Kale also mentions that his people, wanderers all, have long been spurned by the grace of gold. That's very odd considering that so many merchants are found maddened underground and the ones that are found above ground have yellow flame in their eyes. I think someone's lying here. Kale actually has some unused dialogue where he goes full on Shabriri and screams about chaos taking over the world. Quote, "Did you see what they did to my ancestors? The whole clan, buried alive, sick, maddened, husks of themselves. Have you heard their moans? They're hardly humans anymore. They think we worship the three fingers. that we called the maddening sickness upon them. Well, if that's what they expect from us, then that's what they shall get from us. This could have been an explanation for why the three fingers are found all the way down under the capital with the Great Caravan, or this could have been reference to an event that was supposed to have happened during our time playing through the game. Who knows? Anywho, we learn from Hyetta, our new maiden under the Flame of Frenzy, that everything used to be the One Great, and the Greater Will brought fractures and births, which in turn brought suffering and torment to everything, and the only way to cleanse all of that is to burn everything away back to the One Great. I love the concept of the One Great so much, and if you've already heard all of this before, then you've probably been watching my Elden Ring lore videos, and if you haven't, then you can check those out after this video. So going down this path will have you interacting with Hyetta to help her become a maiden, and you'll also be nudged into this direction by Shabriri, Chaos Incarnate, when he tells you to burn yourself to light the Erd Tree on fire rather than getting Melina to sacrifice herself to do it. And then from there, you can imbue yourself with the Flame of Frenzy thanks to the help of the three fingers, burn the Erd Tree, burn the lands between to the ground, and Melina will go full destined death on you. The group also boasts some pretty madness-inducing incantations that are sure to make you and your opponents feel the presence of the yellow flame, and I think they create a very high-risk, high-reward style of play regarding your damage output and the mobility you have while fighting. Shoutouts to all my devout yellow flame worshipper viewers. Could I get a may chaos take the world in the comment section? Thank you. But now, we move on to the Crucible. The creatures under this banner, like Horalu aka Godfrey, the Crucible Knights, and the Misbegotten utilize the Erd Tree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial crucible where all life was once blended. For starters, we can see some of this power in the aspects of the Crucible Erd Tree incantations, all three of them. Not much is known about these primal energies, but they allow the caster to swing a tail, ram into things with a horned shoulder, and breathe out fire from a bloated sack. We can also assume that the Crucible Knights we fight that power up do so using the primordial force as well. After all, it does look like some sort of aspect of the Crucible considering that it looks pretty similar to them in appearance. Could these have been pieces of a primordial beast or force from once upon a time? Maybe we'll get more incantations in the future. Secondly, the word Crucible. It's a word used to describe a vessel used as a melting pot. I've said it before in my other Elden Ring videos, but the One Great previously mentioned when talking about the Flame of Frenzy may be related to the Crucible, where all life was once blended. Perhaps this could have been something like a primordial soup, or they just have similar ideals. You can find the Crucible scattered throughout the lands, spread about above and below ground. One area we can find them in is the Deeproot Depths, which is very thematic since this area is theorized to be where the network of the Great Tree roots spread throughout the lands between. Well, at least underground. It's also said that the Crucible is the Erd Tree in its primordial form. Could this Great Tree have been the name for the Erd Tree in its primordial form as well? Or is it something else? We even see the Godskin nobles using inhuman physiology said to be similar to the Crucible according to the nobles' armor set. So, despite the Greater Will's takeover and possible progression of the Erd Tree, ancient practices still live on, even if they may be shunned away. Now let's move on to the Carian royal family, or what's left of them. We have Renala, Queen of the Full Moon and Lunar Princess Rani. We have to go through how this royal family crumbled because it's pretty fascinating. Renala became a master of lunar magic in her youth, which got the attention of the Ryo Lucaria Academy. She then established the House of Caria, and had her own Carian knights equipped with powerful battle mage style Carian sorceries that could rival the knights of the Golden Order. After some back and forth battling with Radagon that saw no winner, he cleansed himself with Celestial Dew and swore his love to Renala for the reason of make love, not war. So they had 3 kids, Radahn, Rykard and Rani, and then Radagon dipped, leaving Renala with an amber egg containing the Great Rune of the Unborn. Why? Who knows, but he somehow found himself in the arms of Marika. And, we saw how well that went for those two. But what about Renala? She was left pretty heartbroken, and the Academy rebelled against the royal family by locking her in the Grand Library because they saw her as no champion at all. That's where we can find her, clutching onto her amber egg, losing her mind as she practices the art of reincarnation on juvenile scholars who she calls her sweetings. These children are all frail and short-lived, imperfect beings, each and all. Well, lucky for us, we can use the Great Rune of the Unborn to have a proper rebirth. But the same can't be said for Renala's scholars, the enemies we can find that transform back to their normal selves after being defeated, and Buck. That is, if you choose to be cruel and tell him to change. Why does Renala do all of this? To revive her daughter, Ranni, possibly? Ranni does summon a more lively and stronger apparition of Renala for the second stage of her fight, and we know that Ranni survived the Night of the Black Knives, and hopefully Renala realizes this too. But what's happened to Ranni? She had her Empyrean flesh purposefully slain during the Night of the Black Knives, resulting in her moving her soul into another vessel to get away from the Greater Will and her fate under it. Once we join her gang, she introduces us to her vassals, Saluvius, War Counselor Egi, and Blythe, her shadow, and you can help her with her new fate in the Age of Stars ending as her consort eternal. She aims to rid the lands of the influence of the Greater Will, and as her consort, you get the Dark Moon Greatsword. This is a Carian royal tradition bestowed by a queen to her spouse, just as Renala gave Radagon the Golden Order Greatsword. One thing I find pretty interesting is if you help Sellen take over the academy, Renala will hide away behind some bookshelves. But once Sellen turns into a graven mass, she comes back to the center of the room and Sellen is moved to the side. So if you really want to, you can fill this room with a suffering graven mass, a failed reincarnation, and a woman whose mind is slipping. I was talking about lunar magic before briefly, and we do see that Renala can utilize the full moon, and Ranni can utilize the dark moon. We see this in the full moon sorceries, and it's clear that the Carian and some cold sorceries are related to Renala, Ranni, and her mentor Renna, respectively, and there's other factions that stem off of the Carian royals, well, more or less Ranni. The Eternal Cities. It's said that long ago, the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars, and their Lord of Night. Whatever they did, one thing's for certain, they're trying to create their own Lord of Night. It doesn't matter if it would be a silver tier or a more complicated mimic tier, both known as mockeries of life. So by enacting the Age of Stars, you'll become their Lord of Night. No tier needed. Here's another group stemming off of the Carian royal family, or more specifically, the Raya Lucaria Academy that they once headed. Primeval Sorcerers. I already brought up Sellen, who tried to take over the academy but ended up going too far in her scientific inquiries. So did you know that studying the primeval current is a forbidden tradition of glintstone sorcery, and creating graven masses, also known as seeds of stars, is done by fashioning sorcerers together? The two major sorcerers that we know of that practice primeval sorceries are Azure and Lusat. They founded the primeval spells Comet Azure and Stars of Ruin respectively, and the founding reign of stars sorcery was discovered by an ancient astrologer and is said to be the eldest primeval sorcery, and founding glintstone sorcery. If this is the case, then the primeval current is connected to glintstone. Speaking of, Azure and Lusat both gazed into it. Azure saw darkness, leaving him both bewitched and fearful of the abyss, and Lusat beheld the final moments of a great star cluster, breaking him. So, it's safe to say that the current is an extremely powerful force or entity. But now we have to move on to another part of the lands between, the Volcano Manor and its recusants. These recusants work under Praetor Rykard, which I stated was one of Renala's and Radagon's children in the Volcano Manor. He's a demigod, holder of a great rune, and is reviled for his blasphemy and serpentine demeanor. Long story short, he fed himself to the blasphemous serpent and now he wishes to devour the gods. But anyway, what do the recusants do? They wage war against the Erdtree, the Round Table, and the Tarnished, and are led by the consort to Rykard, Lady Tanith. Strong Tarnished warriors are invited to the manor just as we are by Raya, later known as Zoraya. Tarnished are then given contracts to hunt down their fellow Tarnished who are in service of the Round Table, and if you're a fantastic hunter, then you get to meet with Rykard, get eaten and become part of his family. Out of all of the NPCs we can find here, I feel like the most tragic one is the previously mentioned Zoraya, who only wanted to find out who she was and what secrets were kept away from her by her adoptive mother, Tanith. And then we have Patches, because of course he would join a faction that hunts down Tarnished. But from this point, if you follow Patch's questline, you actually see a very vulnerable side to him. Does he act like that to manipulate the Tarnished? Probably not, since he hints that he doesn't have to and we're just good people. Patches gives the player the Dancer's Castanets to give to Tanith. Why? All we can do is really speculate and guess. Perhaps she was a dancer once upon a time, and this was to remind her of her past so she doesn't go overboard. Either way, she clearly meant something to Patches, and she rejects the item because she's too enthralled in eating Rykard and being his consort. Tanith has a Crucible Knight too, and you can fight it if you smack Tanith, ending her. Why she has a Crucible Knight is unknown, but the Crucible is always related to primordial powers. So could Rykard have tapped into some of these powers, or an ancient power similar to the Crucibles? It might explain the powers of the Blasphemous Serpent. What's good to also point out is that moving further into the manor, well outside of it, presents us with more to explore to reach Rykard in another way. Taking note of the environment, there's a lot of lava, humanoid snakes, and albinurics. Through doing Zoraya's quest, we find out that she is a snake lady, and we can obtain Daedalus' woe, which implies that she was born from some sort of wicked pleasure, so maybe these other snakes were born of that pleasure too. Regarding the albinuric, they're found around cages and they seem tortured. It paints a pretty grim image of the manor, that just below the main rooms is a place used for experiments and torture, especially since some of the albinuric can be seen wearing black dumplings. Masks that lend torture an extra degree of cruelty, and it's probably the reason why they're so ballistic. Either way, we pretty much ruin everything for the faction when we defeat Rykard, until he revives again, I suppose. He's also associated with a single magma incantation, Rykard's Rancor, which summons the searing spirits of heroes who met a violent end in the bowels of Rykard. Also, you'd think that joining the Recusants would create issues at the Round Table too, but no one seems to care. Actually, speaking of no one caring, the Mohgwyn Dynasty, one of the most dead factions to be a part of, and that's saying something because we haven't even properly covered those who live in death. And just like the Recusants, despite the consequences that should be had for joining this faction, there isn't any. Why would there be consequences? Because you can get to Mohgwyn's palace early by going through Vare's questline. The big issue here is the player having to invade other Tarnished and having to obtain the blood of a maiden. That seems like it should have some consequences at the Round Table or for becoming an Elden Lord, but oh well. But anyway, once we get to the underground palace, we can see that the place is littered with bloodied variants of creatures like dogs, monstrous crows, putrid corpses, albinurics, and we can fight a few white masks down here along with Vare, and some of those sanguine nobles that appear out of pools of blood. Speaking of blood, we have a few blood incantations associated with all of this and the legendary blood flame talons which can be obtained after defeating Mohg. Who is Mohg? The one who's running the show, Margit's twin cursed omen brother. Mohg embraced his omen blood and found the Formless Mother, an outer god, deep underground. She ignited his blood with fire and then he developed blood flame magic. So now he wants to bring about the Mohgwyn Dynasty. We can also find the fabled Miquella, aka Saint Trina here in Mohg's boss room. He stole Miquella away from the Halig tree to ascend him to godhood status since he's Empyrean, a being capable of becoming the new god of a coming age, and Mohg can be his consort of sorts. He attempted this by hibernating in a cocoon with Miquella and had his followers offer blood to drench the chamber for Miquella's awakening, but alas, he wouldn't awaken. Vare asks us to wait and come to the palace when the dynasty is ready, but screw that, we crash the party. Mohg comes out of the cocoon in a pool of blood to fight us. He's defeated and that's that. Goodbye to the dynasty. All of this is why the faction is so dead. You expect a bunch of devout followers, some noise, volume of people, and some organization around here for a coming dynasty, but no. It's a pretty empty area devoid of, well, really anything. It's quite pretty though. Speaking of dead, death. Those who live in death. Long story short, one of Marika's children, Godwyn, whose father is Godfrey, was slain at the same time Rani was during the night of the Black Knife assassinations. Unlike Rani having her flesh slain, Godwyn had his soul slain, so his body continued on corrupting into a disturbing mermaid-looking creature. Not only that, he's begun to sprout up around the rest of the lands in the form of cysts, pustules, and growths for the most part. Some of these have developed eyes and even developed into another body, so will these develop into bodies too? They've even made their way into crumbling Farum Azula of all places, and can affect living creatures as we see with these crabs. It's also all associated with the Death Blight status effect that will instantly kill you. However, we do see some sort of strange Death Blight effect Rogier in his lower body before it eventually kills him. You can Death Blight players and NPCs too with Fear's Mist, a death sorcery. There are other death sorceries too that let you summon rancors, the ghost flame, which is related to the death birds, and skeletons. But why skeletons? Because Godwyn and his growths can affect the dead, bringing them back as those who live in death. So when you're fighting a skeletal enemy, take a look around and you might see Godwyn watching. Anyway, we can find out more about all of this through completing Fear's questline, which ultimately leads to obtaining the Mending Rune of the Death Prince for the Age of Duskborn ending. This Mending Rune being Godwyn and Fear's child. Great. Fear is a deathbed companion after all. And now we get to the last major faction. Well, it's more of an accord. The one between the player and Melina. At the start of the game, she offers to be the player's finger maiden to turn rune fragments into strength to aid in our search for the Elden Ring. All she asks is that we take her with us to the foot of the Erd Tree. We fulfill this accord once we reach Leyndell, and Melina confirms that at the East Rampart site of Grace. But we can't get into the Erd Tree, so Melina comes back to us to offer a solution, a new journey to the Flame of Ruin. She'll offer to sacrifice herself to burn the Erd Tree, and she does, unless you scare her away by inheriting the Flame of Frenzy to use yourself to burn the Erd Tree. You aren't sacrificed though. Melina says, quote, "The one who walks alongside Flame shall one day meet the road of destined death." It sounds like she's implying that the Flame of Ruin brings upon destined death to someone and or something. So the Tarnished wouldn't be fated to the ruined flame because the Flame of Frenzy utilizes their flesh as kindling. And obviously, that flame isn't the Flame of Ruin, so destined death be damned.
À la contrebasse.
So those were the bigger factions that make up the lands, but there are smaller ones and groups we can still look at that intertwine with the bigger ones, like Jarberg and the Living Jars. These guys are brought to life by the human flesh and blood inside their vessels. By helping Iron Fist Alexander become a mighty warrior, we find out that the quality of the flesh put into a living jar affects their strength as warriors. The quality of the flesh refers to how strong the deceased person was. The stronger, the better, hence why Alexander wanted to fight Radahn. He wanted his flesh and the flesh of the deceased warriors on the battlefield. The jars reside in Jarberg to the right of Lyonia of the Lake, and they live in peace. For the most part. You see, the jar's fragments command a high price due to the magical power locked within, leaving the jars as unfortunate targets for poachers. And we can see the outcome of this by following Jarban and Dialis Hoslow's quest lines that converge here. He defends the village, sacrificing himself in the process, and you can give Jarban Alexander's innards at the end of his quest to further inspire him to become a warrior, just like his uncle Alexander and Dialis does. After all, the tale of House Hoslow is told in blood. Speaking of blood, the Black Knife Assassins. I brought them up while talking about the night they went on an assassination spree. They're a deadly force of assassins made up of women with ties to Marika, possible ties to the Eternal City, and they're rumored to be Newman. For those who don't know, the Newman are a group of people said to have come to the lands from a place outside of it. You can even pick to be one in the character creation menu. Other than that, not much is known about them. The same can be said about the Godskins, Hunters of the Gods. They slaughtered gods with their black flame and wore their skin in a twisted way to mock them. They were led by the Glowmide Queen, a mysterious and unknown Empyrean. I've seen online discourse of people claiming that she's Rani, Melina, or Marika, but the proof is pretty loose. She's a mystery for now, but maybe we'll get some more info on her in the DLC. I had this piece of art commissioned for my Elden Ring iceberg video by a good buddy, KaibaQ, to capture how I thought she would look like. Is this how you would imagine her to look like too, or would you think of something different? The Godskin were having a great time until Malekith sealed away the Rune of Death, sealing away the Black Flame's true power. Clearly, there's a connection between those two, and I wonder if the Greater Will allowed these god killings to take place. And on another note, are the celebrants in the Windmill Village part of the Godskins too, or just followers and admirers of their acts, mimicking them to a smaller extent? You know, speaking of the gods, the demigods and their armies, you have Radahns, Miscellaneous, Godric's, Raya Lucario Academies, Mikolas, etc., fighting for their demigods and their associated areas. We see some of these armies fight each other as early as the Shattering, and we encounter them throughout the game. They all have their associated magic and fighting techniques too. Radahn has his incredibly mastered gravitational magic that allows him to hold back the stars and face of the Carrion Royals, ride his childhood horse, and fight the Tarnished all at the same time. Melania has her loyal Clean Rot Knights, but also the Servants of Rot that serve to help her and her kin rot and be reborn to become stronger, whether they want it or not. These servants also have incantations associated with them, like Poison, Scarlet Aeonia, which applies Scarlet Rot, and you'll have seen Melania use this over and over and over again in your many attempts against her. Oh, and we can't forget these tasty pest threads. Godric has his knights and servants. He doesn't really seem respected, but he has some cool storm attacks and his grafted design is interesting looking, despite it being a pretty grotesque act. With Godric defeated, Kenneth Heights and Nefeli Lu's questline can continue. Nefeli will take over the castle and become the rightful ruler of Limgrave, and thus, Stormvale has a new leader. The Academy has the Kaku Knights, students, and Moongrim that defend the place and areas around it. Moongrim is a Carrion Knight that utilizes Carrion sorceries to attempt to stop you from getting to Renala, and the Knights and students use Glintstone sorceries. We've been over the lack of respect for Renala, so it's likely that most of the students and Knights protect the Academy for the sake of it. And that leaves us with Miquella and his Haligtree, which was supposed to rival the Erdtree. He has a bunch of followers from various factions that fight under him to protect Melania and the tree. You have the Haligtree soldiers, battle mages, ants, Miranda flowers, spirit callers, snails, misbegotten, oracle envoys, Loretta, rumored to be an Albanuric, and then the rest of them down in Elphael. I mentioned Albanuric, so let's talk about them now. They're beings made by human hands that come in 2 generations. Gen 1s are human-like in appearance but have weak legs that eventually give out on them, and Gen 2s are these dumpy-looking frog fellows that cartwheel. But for as dumpy as they are, I'd say they're pretty adorable. Sadly, they're not so universally liked, and that disdain for them concerned Loretta and she searched for a haven for them. So she left the academy and found that haven, the Haligtree, which we find out by going through Latenna's questline. But now we'll move on to the capital's secret cult, the Ancient Dragon Cult. Lightning is synonymous with dragons, and so we have a bunch of Dragon Cult incantations that allow the player to smite their enemies with lightning, Ancient Dragon Red Lightning, etc. Not much else is known about the cult. The cult formed after Godwyn befriended the dragon Fortissar, who was defeated by Godwyn. What is really interesting is that Lonsix, the sister of Fortissar, took a human form to be a priestess to commune with the knights of the cult. Lonsix is noted to have loved Vike the most, so maybe she met him during her time as a priestess. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering why I pronounce their names like that, it's because they're names that look to have derived from Latin or a Latin-based language, probably French. And there's no way that these names are pronounced how they're commonly agreed upon. Fortisax, Lanciax or Lansax, and Placidusax? No way! But getting back on track, that's all very interesting considering Vike's turn to the Frenzied Flame. But let's look at the Fire Giants and Monks. The Fire Giants borrowed from the power of a Fell God who was bested by Marika. Despite this, the Fell God still lurks within the Giants. Their incantations are shrouded in mystery too, implying that they're well-hidden secrets, and the descriptions give small details to who the Giants are as well. One incantation, Flame of the Fell God, was stolen from Arganthy, the chief of the Flame, who had kept it a secret until it was stolen by Adan, who we can fight in an Everjail. The Fire Giants were also defeated, but this failure released them from their solitary curse to serve as keepers of the Flame for eternity. From here, we have monks and their incantations as well. They guard the flame, have come to worship it, and fear it. This flame is the Flame of Ruin, and obviously, those under the Erdtree would banish prophets who glimpse it within the faith since the burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin. It's not the domain of mere men. Despite this, the champions of the Erdtree use the incantation Flame Protect Me to protect them in the battle with the Fire Giants. After this war, the Fire's Blaze was sealed, and guardians were appointed to watch over it. So would this Fire Giant we fight be watching over it as well? Now we have the Ancestors, found deep underground surrounded by the fake night sky. Ancestral spirits exist as a phenomenon beyond the purview of the Erdtree. Life sprouts from death, as it does from birth. Such is the way of the living. We can assume that's why they're underground, because the Golden Order wouldn't gel with that philosophy. Anyway, we see these sprouts on the Ancestral Spirit's Horn Talisman indicated by the new growths budding from the horns of the fallen king. New life growing from death, and thus one obtains power. These ancestors have followers who eschew letters and metalworking, and they too keep their distance from the Erdtree, awaiting new buds. These are said to sprout from their very flesh, and indeed, their souls. The winged greathorn that we can obtain when unlocking the remembrance of the regal ancestors' power is a weapon of spirit worship suffused with the power of ancestral spirits. The wings are considered as envoyed wings made to reap the lives of beings which experience no sprouting. Which begs the question, do they take these lives to assist lives that can sprout? The follower shamans' shining horned headbands are ideal ceremonial items for ancestral worship if the horns have buds that shine. This seems to apply to horns in general too. The headband also boosts the strength of the ancestral infant's head item that sprays spirit vapor that inflicts magic damage. Just think about how many sproutings it might bear. It seems like we've covered most things, but we're not done yet, because there's a lot of creatures within the lands that could be a part of something bigger and could be fleshed out more in the future. Like the Deathbirds, for example. In the time when there was no Erd Tree, death was burned in ghost flame. Deathbirds were the keepers of that fire. They have some relation to those who live in death, considering that their shtick is also death, and both groups utilize a ghost flame of sorts. There's also an unnamed god of some kind that had a vassal, the Twin Bird, the mother of all Deathbirds that we're yet to see. So there could be another group of creatures dedicated to death. What gives more evidence to this is the mausoleum soldiers and knights, warriors that beheaded themselves to serve their masters in death. The knights brandish armor to evoke the Deathbirds, and a great shield marked with the eclipsed sun, drained of color, is the protective star of soulless demigods. It aids the Mausoleum Knights by keeping destined death at bay. So there's clearly more to Godwyn than meets the eye, and there seems to be practices for events like this. The Bloodstar might have a following too, considering that the guilty made contact with it after having their eyes gouged out by thorns, and because there are aberrant sorceries utilizing what we assume to be the Sar's power, and this would be a form of blood magic. These sorceries require faith to use, turning blood into glintstone, which is noted to be similar to hex magic, and is all reviled by the Academy. So if there was a following, it would be by the guilty who've had their eyes gouged out. And just like with the Glowmide Queen, this drawing of what the Bloodstar might be was created by Kaibaku too. I think it looks great, and it really captures this sort of blood-boiling, angry look that it could have. And what about gravity, or just gravity magic in general that we've seen, which could have spawned a faction, especially considering that Falling Star beasts seem to be worshipped or get taken care of, and Radahn was taught his control over gravity sorceries by an Alabaster Lord. These lords are a race of ancients with skin of stone who were said to have risen to life when a meteor struck long ago. Clearly, something's going on here. But what about even lesser known things like the ancient dragon god that Placidus is waiting to return? There's a whole lot going on in Farum Azula too for no group or faction to exist, right? Same with Dragon Communion, incantations that allow the caster to channel the power of dragons by eating their hearts. Bloody Finger Hunter Yura informs us that partaking in Dragon Communion can be ruinous. As it turns out, doing this too much can turn someone into a dragon. Well, more specifically, a magma worm. We can't do that as the player, but does this mean people commune with the purpose of becoming dragons? What about the Dung Eater or Saint Trina? Do they have followers? There is a cut NPC that worship Trina, so maybe? Rani's Darkmoon? She brings it to the lands in her ending, but does anyone else really know about it? Sellian Assassins? They have their own sorceries, town, and objectives. Quote, they often hunted their fellows, so they're probably a faction of some kind. The Puppeteers. We see Preceptor Saluvus task us with turning Nefeli into a puppet, and then Rani, and the Albinuric Pitia has his own puppets too. It goes pear-shaped for both of them, but it still begs the question of if there are more puppeteers and practices out there. What about the Crystallians? Inorganic beings forged of crystal cleaving close to the ideals of the primeval current, making them revered guests of the sorcerers. Their purpose is to safeguard their crystals unto the end, and it's theorized that they yearn for the return of their creator who will carve for them new brethren. If that's the case, then Crystallians may be a faction by itself, or a smaller one in the sorcerer bubble. Now what about the Zamor? Knights that have challenged the fire giants since the ancient times. Probably considering that they have that history, but they don't seem to be very intact at the moment. The Warriors of the Badlands? It's the group Horalu used to be a part of. Are they still around outside the lands between? Who knows? The Omen? They're mostly locked up deep underground, but they must have had some history and power considering that they had the Knight Cavalry working underneath them. They would deliver death to great warriors, knights, and champions. The Claymen, they use their bubbles to search for their lost oracles. Are they related to the Oracle Envoys? If it's the same oracles they're all under, then probably. We're not exactly sure what these oracles are either. What about the beasts of the lands like Gurang, Blythe, Serosh, etc.? Just like so many other things in this game, their power is ancient and they used to be wild before they became intelligent. When this first happened, they started to use stones as weapons. So where are they now? All atop Farum Azula, or are there more? And finally, the All-Knowing. All we know is that it's Gideon's title, and his staff has a skill that allows him to manifest the realm of the All-Knowing to reduce magic and holy damage negation by 10%. It's one of the more lower tier weapons and skills in the game, but a symbol appears when the skill is used, and it appears on the caster afterwards. So will we see more All-Knowing related sorceries, incantations, or skills? And are there any other people pursuing the title of the All-Knowing? And that's most, if not all, of the groups found in the Lands Between discussed. Some got more attention in this video than others, but we'd be here forever if I kept going on and on about them all. Unless you want that. But I could talk about this for hours on end. It's all so interesting, and these groups sort of just intertwine with each other, creating a massive web of fractures and lore for us players to find and figure out. So, with all of that being said, I hope you learned something new and I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave your thoughts about it down below, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated, and check out Kaiba Q for more of his art, links in description. I have some more Elden Ring topics I'd like to tackle, but also some other topics from other games and media. And of course, here's a massive shout out to my lovely patrons. You guys are legends. If you want to join my Patreon to further support me and my content and gain some very nice exclusive rewards, my Patreon will be in the description for you, and I'll catch ya in the next one.